The January rain drummed against the windows of Oakridge Police Department, creating a somber soundtrack as Detective Olivia Martinez stared at the crime scene photos spread across her desk. Blood spatter analysis, bullet trajectory markers. The still body of Angela Whitman sprawled across the hardwood floor of a remote cabin. A perfect life shattered in seconds by secrets kept for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 25 years of marriage, Detective Wilson said, handing Martinez a steaming cup of coffee. How do you live with someone for 25 years and not know who they really are? Martinez had no answer. After 15 years in law enforcement, she thought she'd seen it all. But this case, a respected businessman, a beloved interior designer, a seemingly picture-perfect marriage, had shaken her faith in what people could hide behind closed doors. Sometimes, she finally replied, picking up the confession letter. Found in Thomas Whitman's coat pocket, the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. Thomas Whitman met the October morning from the comfort of his office's leather chair, watching raindrops trace lazy patterns down the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitman Construction Headquarters. At 52, Tom had built his company from the ground up, transforming a small contracting business into one of Oakridge's most successful construction firms. His office, like himself, was the embodiment of careful planning and attention to detail. Blueprints arranged meticulously on the walnut desk, awards displayed with mathematical precision on the far wall, each element in its designated place. In his 3 decades in the construction business, Tom had learned to value stability and structure above all else. He believed in solid foundations, in buildings and in life. The intercom buzzed softly. "Mr. Whitman, your wife is here to see you." Tom smiled, glancing at his watch. Angela always brought him lunch on Tuesdays, a tradition they'd maintained throughout their 25-year marriage. He straightened his tie and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Send her in, Kate." Angela Whitman entered like a breath of fresh air, elegant in a navy pantsuit that accentuated her tall, slender frame. At 47, she carried herself with the confidence of someone comfortable in their own skin. Her dark hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, framing high cheekbones and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. In one hand, she carried a canvas, a bag from their favorite deli. "You look like you could use a break," she said, placing the bag on his desk and leaning down to kiss his cheek. Her perfume, something with jasmine and vanilla, lingered in the air. "You're a lifesaver," Tom replied. Clearing space for their lunch, the Peterson project is turning into a nightmare. Zoning issues. Angela unpacked the food with efficient movements. Turkey sandwich for him, Mediterranean salad for her, a routine perfected over countless shared lunches. Nothing the great Thomas Whitman can't handle, I'm sure. Her voice held that slight teasing quality he'd always loved. As they ate, Angela talked about her latest interior design project, a lakeside retreat for a tech executive from Portland. She described the space with her hands as much as her words, painting pictures in the air with elegant fingers. Tom watched her, marveling as he often did at how she could transform empty rooms into works of art, seeing possibilities where others saw only blank walls. 25 years next month, he said suddenly, interrupting her description of Italian marble countertops. Angela paused, a fork halfway to her mouth. "Has it really been that long?" November 12th, 1996. "You wore that cream-colored dress with the beaded jacket." She smiled, setting down her fork. "And you were so nervous you dropped the ring. Best fumble of my life." Tom reached across the desk and took her hand, running his thumb over the platinum band that matched his own. "I was thinking, maybe we should do something special. Paris, maybe. You've always wanted to see the Louvre. Something flickered across Angela's face. So brief, Tom almost missed it. Uncertainty? Concern? But then she smiled, and whatever it was, vanished. Paris sounds perfect, she said, squeezing his hand, though I might need to schedule around the Mitchell renovation. Later, Tom would replay this moment in his mind, searching for clues. Was there a tremor in her voice? Did her smile reach her eyes? Were there signs he should have seen? Sarah Bennett had never trusted her sister-in-law. While Tom saw Angela as the perfect partner, Sarah noticed the inconsistencies, the lack of childhood photos, the vague references to her past, the way she changed the subject whenever family histories came up. There's something off about her, Sarah told Tom over coffee the following week. They sat in a corner booth at Oakridge Diner, their monthly sibling catch-up session turning, as it often did, to Tom's marriage. Tom stirred his coffee with unnecessary, "Fujin, 25 years, Sarah. Don't you think if there was something to find, I'd have found it by now?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Did you know she has a separate bank account? Jennifer at the bank mentioned it. Has had it for years, apparently." "So, Angela has her own business. It makes sense to have separate accounts. It's not just that." Sarah hesitated. "Last month, when I stopped by your house to drop off Mum's recipe book, Angela was on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. She was speaking differently, lower, and she ended the call as soon as she saw me." Tom laughed, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're describing my wife taking a private call, not plotting a crime. All I'm saying is people keep secrets, Tom, even from those they love." Tom thought about Sarah's words as he drove to his doctor's appointment later that afternoon. A routine physical, nothing to worry about. At 52, he was in excellent health. Regular workouts at the gym, moderate drinking, the occasional cigar his only vice. The mild fatigue he'd been experiencing lately was probably just stress from work. Dr. Michael Chen had been Tom's physician for over a decade, a calm presence with a methodical approach that appealed to Tom's own orderly nature. Today, however, the doctor seemed unusually solemn as he entered the examination room, a folder clutched in his hands. "Tom," he said, sitting down slowly, "I have your test results." Something in his tone made Tom sit straighter. "Everything okay, Doc?" Dr. Chen opened the folder, arranging the papers with careful precision. "There's something concerning in your blood work. We ran the tests twice to be certain." He paused, meeting Tom's eyes directly. "You've tested positive for HIV." The words hung in the air between them, incomprehensible. "That's not possible," Tom said finally. "There must be a mistake." "I'm afraid not. We were very thorough. But I'm married. I've been with the same woman for 25 years. Doctor." Chen's expression remained professional, but compassion softened his voice. "Tom, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Have you had any sexual partners outside your marriage?" "No, never." "Blood transfusions? Shared needles?" Tom shook his head, the room beginning to tilt around him. "Nothing like that." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Then I have to ask, is it possible your wife has had other partners?" The question hit Tom like a physical blow. Angela, the woman who organized charity events for the Children's Hospital, who remembered the birthdays of every employee at his company, who had nursed him through pneumonia 3 winters ago with unwavering devotion. "No," he said firmly. "Absolutely not." Dr. Chen nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "I'd like to start you on antiretroviral therapy immediately. And Tom," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it would be advisable for your wife to get tested as well." The drive home passed in a blur. Tom's mind cycled through possibilities, each more implausible than the last. A lab error. Contaminated. Equipment, a mix-up with another patient's blood. Anything but the unthinkable alternative. Angela was in her home office when he arrived, surrounded by fabric swatches and design magazines. She looked up as he stood in the doorway, her smile fading as she registered his expression. "Tom, what's wrong?" He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How do you ask your wife of 25 years if she's been unfaithful? If she's been hiding something so fundamental, it could destroy everything they'd built together? "I need to sit down," he managed finally. Angela immediately cleared a space on the sofa in her office, concern etching lines around her eyes. She sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. Her touch, once comforting, now raised questions that sickened him. "You're scaring me," she said, softly. "Did something happen at the doctor's?" Tom took a deep breath, facing her directly. "Dr. Chen found something in my blood work." Another breath. "I've tested positive for HIV." Angela went perfectly still, her face draining of color. Tom watched her reaction closely, searching for guilt, for panic, for any sign of deception. What he saw instead was something more complex. Shock, certainly, but beneath it a strange resignation, as if some long-dreaded moment had finally arrived. "Say something," he urged when the silence became unbearable. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." 5 words, 5 simple words that collapsed 25 years of trust like a house built on sand. "So it's true," Tom said, his own voice unrecognizable. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "You've been unfaithful." Angela stood abruptly, moving to the window. Her reflection showed tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think, Tom." "Then tell me what it is." He was shouting now, the control he prided himself on splintering. "Tell me how my wife of 25 years gave me HIV if she hasn't been sleeping with someone else." Angela turned to face him, her composure cracking. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you before we ever got married." Tom felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "What are you talking about?" "I need you to listen. Really listen." She took a shaky breath. "Before I met you, before I was Angela, I was someone else." The cryptic statement hung between them. Tom shook his head, confusion momentarily overtaking anger. "What does that mean?" "I was born as Anthony," she said, the words emerging with visible effort. "I transitioned when I was 21, 5 years before we met." Tom stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. Anthony? Transition? The words floated in his consciousness, refusing to connect to the woman standing before him, the woman he'd shared a bed with for over 2 decades. "That's not possible," he said at last. "We've been intimate. He trailed off, memories replaying with new horrifying context. "Medical technology was different then," Angela said quietly. "I had surgery. I adapted our intimate life. Found ways to make you believe what you needed to believe." Tom felt the room spinning. 25 years of memories were being rewritten, in real time, transforming from cherished moments into elaborate deceptions. "And the HIV?" he asked, his voice hollow. Angela closed her eyes briefly. "I contracted it before my transition. I've been managing it with medication for decades. My viral load was undetectable. I was told the risk of transmission was minimal. I convinced myself it would be safe." "Safe?" Tom's voice rose again. "You've been lying to me every single day for 25 years, and you thought it would be safe?" "I loved you," Angela whispered. "I still love you. I was afraid of losing you." Tom stood, needing distance between them. "Who else knows? Does everyone know? Have people been laughing behind my back all these years?" Only Jennifer, no one else. Jennifer Cooper, Angela's closest friend. The pieces were falling into place, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room, the inside jokes he never quite understood. "I need to leave," Tom said, moving toward the door. "I can't be here right now." "Tom, please!" Angela stepped toward him, reaching out. "Don't touch me!" The words came out as a snarl. "I don't know who you are." He grabbed his keys and wallet, ignoring Angela's pleas, as he stormed out of the house that no longer felt like home. He drove aimlessly through Oakridge's rain-slicked streets, past the landmarks of their shared life. The restaurant where they'd had their first date, the park where he'd proposed, the church where they'd exchanged vows. Each memory now tainted, corrupted by the knowledge that they were built on fundamental lies. Eventually, he found himself at Robert Davis's doorstep. His business partner and oldest friend took one look at Tom's face and ushered him inside without questions, placing a glass of whiskey in his trembling hands. "Whatever it is," Robert said, settling into the armchair across from him, "we'll figure it out." Tom drained the whiskey in one burning swallow. "My whole life is a lie." Robert waited patiently as Tom poured out the story in disjointed fragments. The doctor's diagnosis, Angela's confession, the realization that the person he'd loved most in the world had never truly existed. "Jesus," Robert whispered when Tom finally fell silent. "I don't even know what to say." "There's nothing to say." Tom stared into his empty glass. 25 years, Rob. We renewed our vows on our 20th anniversary. We've talked about retiring together, buying that place on the coast, and all this time. What are you going to do?" Tom shook his head. "I don't know. I can't go back there, not tonight." "Stay here," Robert offered immediately. "Guest room's yours as long as you need it." That night, lying in Robert's spare bedroom, Tom cycled through emotions like flipping channels: rage, grief, disbelief, humiliation. He thought of Sarah's suspicions over the years, her insistence that Angela was hiding something. He'd defended his wife so vigorously, dismissing his sister's concerns as paranoia or jealousy. His phone buzzed repeatedly with messages and calls from Angela. He ignored them all, finally turning the device off entirely. The darkness of the unfamiliar room pressed around him as the rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows. 25 years, a quarter century of his life, invested in a relationship founded on deception. The magnitude of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. Somewhere in the early hours of the morning, as exhaustion finally pulled him toward uneasy sleep, Tom made a decision. He needed answers, not just from Angela, but about Angela, about the person she had been before, about what else she might be hiding. The next day, he called in sick to work for the first time in years, then drove to the Overlook, a family cabin nestled in the woods 30 miles outside Oakridge. The rustic structure had belonged to his parents, a retreat where the Whitman family had spent summers away from the city heat. After their passing, Tom had inherited the property, but rarely visited. Too many memories, too little time. Now, its isolation was exactly what he needed. The cabin stood dark and silent as he pulled into the gravel driveway, the surrounding pines swaying in the autumn wind. Inside, sheets draped the sparse furniture, and the air smelled of disuse and pine needles. Tom opened windows, shook out blankets, and built a fire in the stone hearth, focusing on these simple tasks to keep his mind from spiraling. Once the cabin was reasonably habitable, he pulled out his laptop and began his search. Anthony. That was all he had, a first name and an approximate age. It wasn't much, but Tom had built his business on thoroughness and persistence. He would find the truth, however deeply it was buried. Meanwhile, Angela Whitman sat in her empty house, surrounded by the artifacts of a shared life that was rapidly unraveling. She had called in sick to her design studio, unable to face clients or employees, with her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. She tried Tom's phone repeatedly, each unanswered call increasing her desperation. Finally, she called the one person who knew her truth. Jennifer Cooper arrived within the hour, rushing into the house with the familiarity of decades of friendship. She found Angela in the kitchen, staring blankly at an untouched cup of tea. "He knows," Angela said simply. Jennifer sat beside her, taking her cold hands. "Everything? About Anthony, about the HIV." Angela's voice cracked. "I've lost him. Jen, you don't know that. Tom loves you, once the shock wears off." "You didn't see his face." Angela pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. 25 years of love just gone, replaced by disgust. "He's in shock," Jennifer insisted. "Anyone would be. Give him time." But time was precisely what Angela feared most now. Time for Tom to investigate, to uncover the rest of what she'd hidden. Because while her identity as Anthony was the foundation of her deception, it wasn't the entirety of it. There was still the matter of Anthony's past, of why he had disappeared so completely, of the people who might still be looking for him, even after all these years. At the Overlook cabin, Tom's search was proving frustratingly difficult. Without a last name or specific location, Anthony yielded thousands of irrelevant results. He tried narrowing it down, Anthony plus transgender plus Oakridge, but found nothing useful. On the second day of his self-imposed exile, he received a text from Sarah. "Heard you've gone off-grid. Everything okay?" Tom hesitated before responding. Sarah had been right about Angela all along, but confirming her suspicions would make everything more real somehow, more irreversible. "Need some time alone," he wrote back. "I'll call you soon." Minutes later, his phone rang. Sarah, ignoring his implied request for space. "What happened?" she asked without preamble when he answered. Tom sighed, rubbing his eyes. "You were right about Angela. She's been hiding something." "I knew it." Sarah's voice held no triumph, only concern. "Is it another man?" Tom laughed bitterly. "In a manner of speaking," he hesitated, then told her the truth about the HIV diagnosis, about Angela's birth identity as Anthony. Sarah was silent for so long that Tom checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm coming over. I'm not at home. I'm at the Overlook. Then I'll meet you there. This isn't something you should deal with alone." Before Tom could protest further, she had hung up. He set the phone down, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over him. Sarah's support was welcome, but her protective instincts sometimes manifested as a take-charge approach that left little room for processing. Returning to his laptop, Tom tried a new search angle. If Angela had transitioned in the early 1990s, there would have been medical records, legal name changes, documentation of some kind. He began searching for transgender resources and medical facilities active during that period in the Pacific Northwest. A knock at the cabin door interrupted his research several hours later. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows. Through the pines, as Tom opened the door to find Sarah standing on the porch, a grocery bag in one arm. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting, pushing past him into the cabin. "When did you last eat?" Tom shrugged, closing the door. "Yesterday, maybe." Sarah shook her head disapprovingly, heading straight for the small kitchen area. "I brought supplies, real food, not whatever processed junk you've been surviving on." As she unpacked groceries and began preparing a simple meal, Tom returned to his laptop, updating her on his largely unsuccessful search. "You need more information," Sarah said, chopping vegetables with efficient strokes. "This Anthony could be from anywhere. I've been through Angela's office at home 100 times over the years. Never found anything suspicious." Sarah paused, knife hovering over an onion. "What about her design studio? She must keep personal items there too. Tom hadn't considered this. Angela's downtown studio housed her interior design business, Whitman Interiors, employing 5 people in a converted industrial space. He had helped her renovate it years ago, but rarely visited anymore, their professional lives largely separate, despite their shared last name on the business. "It's worth a look," he admitted, "but I can't just walk in there now. The staff would tell her immediately." "So, go after hours," Sarah suggested, resuming her chopping. "You must still have keys." Tom did have keys. He handled the security system installation personally when Angela first leased the space. The idea of sneaking into his wife's business felt wrong, a violation of trust. But then, what was left to violate? Their entire relationship had been built on deception. After dinner, Sarah returned to Oakridge, extracting a promise from Tom to check in regularly. "Don't do anything stupid," she warned as she left. "I know you're hurting, but think before you act." Tom assured her he would, though his mind was already turning over the possibility of searching Angela's studio. Not tonight. It was too late and he was exhausted. But tomorrow, perhaps. One way or another, he would find the truth about the person he had married. As darkness settled over the cabin, Tom poured himself a generous measure of whiskey and stepped onto the porch. The night air was crisp with approaching winter, stars emerging in the clear sky above the pines. In this peaceful setting, the chaos of his life seemed almost surreal, like something happening to someone else, a story he was watching unfold from a distance. But the heaviness in his chest, the burning in his throat as he swallowed the whiskey, the tremor in his hands when he thought of Angela's confession, these sensations were undeniably real. His life had fractured along a fault line he hadn't known existed, and he was still falling through the opening chasm, no bottom yet in sight. Back in Oakridge, Angela sat alone in her bedroom, surrounded by photographs of her life with Tom. Their wedding day, the Mediterranean cruise for their 10th anniversary, holidays and ordinary moments frozen in time, all evidence of a happiness that had been genuine, at least on her part. She picked up her phone and tried Tom's number one more time. It went straight to voicemail. "Tom," she said after the beep, her voice breaking, "please come home. Let me explain everything. What we have is real, even if how we started wasn't. Please, I love you." She ended the call, knowing her words were inadequate against the magnitude of her deception. Setting the phone down, Angela moved to her closet and pushed aside hanging clothes to reveal a small safe embedded in the wall. The combination, 1121996, their wedding date, clicked softly as she turned the dial. Inside lay a small wooden box, its contents unseen for decades. Angela removed it with trembling hands, carrying it to the bed. She hesitated before opening the lid, as if releasing something dangerous contained within. The box held the last remaining evidence of Anthony's existence, a few faded photographs, a birth certificate, newspaper clippings from a small Idaho town, and beneath these, wrapped in soft cloth, a key to a safety deposit box in Portland. Some secrets, Angela thought as she closed the box, could never come to light, for both their sakes. The next morning dawned cold and clear at the overlooked cabin. Tom woke with a pounding headache, the empty whiskey bottle on the coffee table, a silent accusation. Checking his phone, he found 5 missed calls from Angela and 1 text from Sarah. Doing okay? He responded to his sister, but continued to ignore his wife. As the coffee brewed, Tom formulated his plan. Angela would be at her design studio today. Her work calendar had always been meticulously maintained on their shared digital calendar. Between 3 and 5 p.m., she had a client meeting at a property across town. That would give him a window to search her office without confrontation. The hours crawled by. Tom alternated between furious research on his laptop and moments of paralyzing grief when memories ambushed him. Angela surprising him with concert tickets for his 45th birthday, her face illuminated by candlelight during power outages, her laughter during their trip to Yellowstone 3 summers ago. Had any of it been real? At 2:30, he drove back to Oakridge, rehearsing what he would do if he encountered one of Angela's employees. A plausible story about retrieving documents for an upcoming project. His name was on the lease, after all. He had every right to be there. Whitman Interiors occupied the second floor of a renovated warehouse in downtown Oakridge. Tom parked a block away and waited until 3:15, watching Angela's car pull out of the reserved spot in front. After giving her sufficient time to reach her appointment, he approached the building, his heart hammering against his ribs. The main office was locked but yielded easily to his key. Inside, the workspace was impeccably designed, a showcase of Angela's talent with its sophisticated color palette and thoughtful details. 2 of her employees still occupied their desks, looking up in surprise as Tom entered. Mr. Whitman, the younger designer, Mia, he remembered, stood up. "We weren't expecting you. Just picking up some documents for the Peterson project." He lied smoothly, moving toward Angela's private office. "Don't mind me." He felt their curious glances as he unlocked Angela's door and slipped inside, closing it behind him. The office was pure Angela, elegant but functional, with floor plans and material samples organized with mathematical precision. Tom stood momentarily frozen, realizing he had no idea what he was looking for or where to begin. "Focus," he told himself. "Start with the basics." The filing cabinet yielded nothing suspicious, just client folders, tax documents, business licenses. The desk drawers contained office supplies, a spare pair of reading glasses, emergency makeup. Everything painfully ordinary. Behind the desk hung a large abstract painting that Tom had always admired. On a hunch, he lifted it from its hooks, revealing a small wall safe. Unlike the one at home, this one required a key rather than a combination. Tom searched the office methodically, checking every potential hiding spot for a key. Nothing. He was about to give up when he noticed the potted orchid on the windowsill, Angela's favorite flower. The plant looked real, but when he touched a petal, he discovered it was artificial. Turning the pot over, he found a small key taped to the bottom. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside lay a single manila envelope, worn at the edges from a handling. Tom removed it with unsteady hands, returned to the desk and spread its contents across the polished surface. What he found left him breathless. News clippings from a small Idaho newspaper dated March 1990. The headline jumped out. At him, "Local man wanted in connection with armed robbery." Beneath it, a grainy photograph of a young man labeled Anthony Moretti, 21. The face was younger, harder, but unmistakably Angela. Police reports, court documents, a wanted poster. According to these records, Anthony Moretti had participated in a bank robbery that left a security guard critically injured. While his accomplices were apprehended, Anthony had disappeared with over $200,000 in cash. The final document was a death certificate for Anthony Moretti, dated June 1991, declared dead after a boating accident on Lake Coeur d'Alene, a body never recovered, presumed drowned. Tom sat back, his mind racing to connect the pieces. Anthony hadn't just transitioned to become Angela. He had faked his own death, created a new identity, and disappeared with stolen money. The perfect vanishing act. A soft gasp from the doorway startled him. Mia stood there wide-eyed, taking in the scattered documents. "Mr. Whitman, I need these," Tom said, hastily gathering the papers. "For a personal project." The young woman nodded uncertainly, backing away. Tom knew she would call Angela immediately. His time was running out. He photographed each document with his phone, then replaced everything exactly as he'd found it. As he locked the office door behind him, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Angela." He silenced it and hurried out, nodding stiffly to the concerned employees as he passed. Back in his car, Tom sat motionless, staring at the phone's screen as calls and messages from Angela poured in. His wife was not just a liar about her identity and health status, she was a fugitive, a criminal. When his phone finally fell silent, he started the engine and drove, not back to the cabin, but toward the police station. Whatever his feelings for Angela, whatever their history together, he couldn't ignore what he'd discovered. A man had been seriously injured in that robbery. There were legal consequences that couldn't be avoided. Halfway to the station, he changed his mind, turning the car toward home instead. He needed to confront Angela first, needed to hear from her own lips the full truth of her deception before involving the authorities. The house was dark when he arrived, no sign of Angela's car in the driveway. Tom let himself in, moving through the familiar rooms that now felt like a stranger's home. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water, then noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. They rarely used the landline anymore, but old habits died hard in a small town. He pressed play. Angela's voice filled the room tight with panic. "Tom," Mia called, "I know what you found. Please don't do anything until we talk. There's more. You need to understand. I'm going to the Overlook. I know you've been staying there. Please, let me explain." Tom checked the timestamp. The message had been left 40 minutes ago. Angela would be at the cabin by now, waiting for him, unaware that he had come home instead. He hesitated only briefly before heading back to his car. Whatever her crimes, whatever her lies, he deserved answers. Face to face, one last time. The drive to the Overlook seemed to take forever, darkness falling as he navigated the winding Forest Road. Rain began to fall, softly at first, then in sheets that reduced visibility to a few yards ahead. Tom slowed, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, his mind churning with questions and accusations. Angela's car was parked in front of the cabin when he arrived, rain drumming on its roof. Light spilled from the cabin windows, casting long, golden rectangles onto the wet ground. Tom sat in his car for several minutes, gathering his courage, rehearsing what he would say. Finally, he stepped out into the rain and approached the cabin. Through the window, he could see Angela pacing, her face drawn with worry. She jumped. When he opened the door, rainwater dripping from his coat onto the wooden floor. "Tom." His name was a whisper on her lips. "You came." "I found the files, Angela." His voice was steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Or should I call you Anthony Moretti?" She flinched as if struck. "I can explain. A bank robbery, a man critically injured, faking your own death." Tom struggled to keep his voice level. 25 years, and I never knew I was married to a fugitive. Angela Anthony sank onto the sofa, shoulders curving inward. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. The guard wasn't supposed to be hurt. I was just the driver. I didn't know my partners would get violent. So that makes it okay. Tom's control slipped, anger bleeding into his words. "You've been living a lie our entire marriage." "Not everything was a lie," she protested, tears streaming down her face. "My love for you was real, is real." "How? Can I believe anything you say?" Tom paced the small room, rainwater pooling beneath his feet. "You hid your birth gender. You hid your HIV status. You hid that you're wanted for armed robbery. What else are you hiding, Angela?" She stood suddenly, moving toward him with outstretched hands. "Nothing. Everything is out now. We can work through this, start fresh." "Start fresh." Tom backed, away from her touch. "You're a fugitive. There's a man out there who was injured because of you." "He recovered," Angela said quickly. "I followed the case. He made a full recovery." "That doesn't change what happened," Tom shouted, his composure finally shattering. You've made me complicit in your crimes. Do you understand that? Every day I didn't know, every day I lived with you, I was helping a fugitive escape justice." Angela's face hardened suddenly, something shifting in her eyes. "What are you going to do? Turn me in?" The question hung between them, charged with dangerous potential. Tom realized with a start that the woman before him, this stranger wearing his wife's face, was cornered. And cornered fugitives made desperate choices. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I need time to think." "There is no time, Angela," said her voice suddenly calm. Too calm. "If you go to the police, everything ends. My life, our marriage, everything." She moved toward her purse on the counter, her movements deliberate. Tom watched, a creeping dread rising in his chest as she reached inside and pulled out a small handgun. "Angela," he said cautiously, raising his hands, "think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it," she replied, her voice eerily steady. "For 25 years, I've thought about what would happen if the truth came out. I've prepared for this day." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating her face in harsh white light. In that instant, Tom saw something he'd never seen before. The shadow of Anthony Moretti behind Angela's familiar features, cold and calculating. "We can leave," she continued, the gun steady in her hand. "Start over somewhere new, change our names, our identities. We've got money saved." "More lies," Tom said softly. "More running. That's your solution. It's our only option now." She stepped closer. "I won't go to prison, Tom. I can't." Tom looked at the woman he had loved for 25 years, trying to reconcile her with the desperate criminal before him now. In her eyes, he saw fear, determination, and something else, a flicker of the same emotion he'd glimpsed in their early years together when he'd catch her watching him with an intensity that had once seemed like devotion, but now revealed itself as calculation. "You never loved me," he said, the realization striking him with stunning clarity. "I was your cover story, your perfect hiding place." Angela's expression faltered. "That's not true. I chose you because you were kind, stable, but I grew to love you. I did." "Did you?" Tom stepped closer, heedless of the gun. "Or was I just convenient? The reliable construction guy who would never ask too many questions, who would give you the respectable life you needed to hide." "Stop it," she whispered, the gun trembling slightly. "You don't understand." "I think I finally do," Tom said. 25 years and I'm just now seeing the truth. You didn't marry me for love. You married me for protection." Angela's face contorted with a complex mixture of emotions. "It wasn't like that. Not entirely." "Put the gun down," Tom said, gently. "This isn't the answer." For a moment, she seemed to consider it, the weapon lowering slightly. Then headlights swept across the cabin windows as a car pulled into the driveway. Angela tensed, raising the gun again. "Who is that?" she demanded. "Did you call the police?" Before Tom could answer, the cabin door burst open. Sarah stood on the threshold, rainwater cascading from her coat. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Tom with his hands raised, Angela pointing a gun at his chest. "What the hell?" Sarah gasped. Everything happened at once. Sarah lunged forward. Angela turned, startled. The gun discharged with a deafening crack. Glass shattered. Sarah screamed. Tom threw himself forward, tackling Angela to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor. In the chaotic seconds that followed, Tom was aware only of disjointed sensations. The weight of Angela beneath him, Sarah's continued screaming, the smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. Then, gradually, the warm wetness seeping through his shirt. Rolling off Angela, he saw the dark stain spreading across her chest. The bullet had struck her, not Sarah. "Angela," he breathed, pressing his hands against the wound. "Hold on, just hold on." Her eyes found his, pain clouding their familiar brown depths. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Sarah was on the phone, calling an ambulance. Her voice high and panicked. Tom barely heard her, focused entirely on the woman bleeding beneath his hands. "Why did you come here with a gun?" he asked, desperate to understand even now. "What were you planning to do?" Angela's lips curved, in a sad smile. "I don't know anymore. I just couldn't lose you, couldn't lose everything." As her eyes fluttered closed, Tom realized the final, terrible truth. In her desperation to keep her secrets, Angela had been prepared to kill him, the ultimate betrayal of their 25 years together. The realization cut deeper than any of her previous lies. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, but it was already too late. Angela Whitman, born Anthony Moretti, was pronounced dead at the scene. In the days that followed, as police pieced together the complex history of the woman Tom had married, he sat numb through interviews and interrogations. Detective Martinez was kind but thorough, her questions gentle but persistent. Tom told her everything: the HIV diagnosis, the revelation of Angela's birth identity, the discovery of her criminal past, the confrontation at the cabin. She had the gun for protection, he explained, staring at his hands, still feeling the phantom warmth of Angela's blood. At least, that's what she told herself. But when she was cornered, when everything was falling apart... Martinez nodded, understanding the unspoken conclusion. "Mr. Whitman, based on the evidence and witness statements, this is clearly a case of self-defense. You won't be facing charges." But the absence of legal consequences did little to ease the burden Tom carried. 25 years of memories contaminated by deception, a future suddenly, violently erased. And the haunting question that kept him awake at night: had there ever been any truth between them at all? The investigation eventually uncovered the full scope of Angela's deception, the money from the robbery, carefully invested over decades, the elaborate steps she had taken to create her new identity, the ongoing medications that had kept her HIV controlled, and her secret safe. 1 month after Angela's death, Tom sat across from Dr. Chen, waiting for the results of his latest test. "Your viral load remains undetectable," the doctor said, a rare smile softening his professional demeanor. "The medication is working well." Tom nodded, accepting this. Small mercy amid the wreckage of his life. Will I ever be free of this? Dr. Chen understood he wasn't just asking about the virus. "Time doesn't heal all wounds," he said gently, "but it does give us the strength to carry them." Outside the medical center, Tom paused on the steps, looking up at the clearing sky. The rain had finally stopped, at least for today. He thought of the cabin, now cleaned and repaired, waiting empty in the woods. He thought of the house in Oakridge, still filled with the artifacts of a shared life that had been real for him, if not for her. He thought of Angela, of her smile in the early morning light, of her hand in his as they walked through autumn leaves, of 25 years of moments that he could neither fully trust nor entirely discard. The truth, Tom was learning, rarely came in simple packages. Angela had lied about who she was, about her past, about her health. She had married him for convenience, for protection, for cover. But somewhere in those 25 years, something genuine had grown alongside the deception, imperfect, compromised, but not entirely false. "It wasn't all a lie," he whispered to the empty air, finally granting himself permission to believe this one small truth among the ruins. Then, squaring his shoulders against whatever lay ahead, Thomas Whitman began the long walk home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.